finally, God dwelt in the old temple, in the Holy of Holies, the Sancto Sanctorum. Where do we find our holiness? Where do we find that centre that is so precious, that is so delectable, that is so inviting, that draws us in, and we experience the holiness of God? I've been blessed by the worship tonight, and in conference, and as I travel, as we come into that place. And it's great that we have music that is able to bring us to a place of worship, that is bring us to a place of holiness. But God desires and longs to meet with us in the quietness of our homes, as we're driving along in the car, as we're at work and dealing with a particularly bad-tempered boss or an awkward customer. Even in the most mundane of moments, God enters in, and that holiness can be present with us. And yet sometimes we want to hold grudges. We want to go back. We go so far, and then we look back and say, but you don't know what they're like. You don't know what they've done to me. You don't know what I've experienced. I don't. Reverend Clinton doesn't. But God does. God knows and still calls us to love one another. I was in awe of a Christian leader who I met at a conference from the fellowship, the Radically Inclusive Church, Bishop Yvette Flander. And in one of her seminars to students, she was saying, if you imprison someone, you have to stay in that prison to make sure they don't escape. If you imprison someone, you have to stay in that prison to make sure they don't escape. And she used the analogy of Alcatraz, where the guards who imprisoned the people on that island were allowed to the mainland once every 2 or 3 weeks for 2 or 3 hours, and then they had to go back. So whether they were on duty or not, whether they were thinking about it or not, they still inhabited the same desolate, miserable, forsaken place that their captives also inhabited. And if we refuse to let go, if we refuse to be real with ourselves and honest with ourselves, because moving from a place of captivity is not easy. Sometimes we have to say hard things to ourselves. Sometimes we have to speak hard messages and truths to our communities, even to our churches. But if we have courage to do that, if we're able to hold on to that message that love keeps no record of wrongs, if we can rebuild the temple in our own lives, in our churches, and in the community, then we can place it on the hill where all can see, where all can be welcome, where all can come in and travel with us. Do we find the divine and the holy in one another? Are we able to seek out the preciousness? Are we able to understand the motivation of somebody, even if we don't particularly agree or like how they are going about doing it? God brings us into the most holy of places. That holy of places in the Old Testament was in the Holy of Holies. And yet we read that on that first Good Friday, that first day of Christ's crucifixion, when he died upon that cross, the temple, the curtain that separated the inner courtyard from the Holy of Holies was torn in two. It represented that the separation, that the block, that the requirement for somebody to act on your behalf was taken away, was removed. And you are invited, as I am invited, into that most precious of times, into that Holy of Holies. The text in Haggai that we had this evening goes on to say this: the silver is mine, and the gold is mine, saith God of hosts. And the glory of this latter house will be greater than the glory of the former house, saith the God of hosts. And in this place will I give peace. We sometimes grieve too much for the past. We sometimes long for what might have been, what could have been, what shouldn't have been. And we lose sight of what is.
Yes.
We lose sight of where God has placed us now. We lose sight and we lose vision and we lose focus of what God is calling us to do, to build one another up in love and mercy and grace, to be honest with one another, to trust one another, to be an inclusive fellowship where all are welcome, even ourselves, that brings ourselves to church as well as invites the strangers on the highways and the byways. It's never too late to rebuild the temple, because the foundation is always there. The psalmist tells us, God says, I saw your unformed body before one of your days came to be. God has always done this, and in his eternalness will always be with us. God knows us from yesterday, knows us today, and tomorrow. There is nothing that we can say to God that will shock him. There is nothing that will bring a surprise to God's face, because God knows it already. So what's holding us back? What's holding us back? Many of us, and I will not extend this to all because we are all at different levels of our journey and in our path, but many of us have entered into that promised land. But too many are living as refugees. Too many are living waiting to be found out. Too many are living understanding with their minds what is being preached and what is being spoken and what they see, but not understanding and feeling and experiencing with their hearts. If we are truly to be a place of inclusiveness, if we truly are to be a place of love, of an agape that covenants ourselves with God and with one another, that says love looking no reckoning wrongs, if we are to be that place, if we are to be that people, then we need to stop living as refugees, and we need to start celebrating citizenship.